You don't need a luxury kitchen to prepare gourmet meals. My name is Dennis. I live in a mobile home in a trailer park, and this is my kitchen. I'm going to do something today that normally I wouldn't do, another meatloaf recipe. I'm not particularly fond of meatloaf, and I know a lot of people who don't like it, although I do like my Tuscan meatloaf, and that's a popular meatloaf among my recipes. However, I got the idea to do this meatloaf because I was watching this TV chef on a TV cooking show making the meatloaf, and I kept thinking, I wouldn't do it that way. No, I would do it this way. I would do that this way. And then it occurred to me, so do it your way. And that's what I'm going to do. This is a meatloaf that supposedly is popular at a certain restaurant on the East Coast. I thought I would give it a try, so let's start cooking. First thing I need to do here is dice an onion. I have my own way of dicing onion. I don't do it the way the chefs do on TV. I think they draw the knife too much toward their fingers. That gives me the creeps. And I have heard from people, fans of my website, who have commented that they like my way better because it's safer, because some of them have cut themselves. So I have my own safe way of cutting onions that I use. It's effective, it works for me. So this is how I dice an onion. Take that top section away. I cut down through the onion first, and then use this to peel the outer layer of skin off. Get rid of the part I don't need. Okay. And then what the chefs do on TV, you want to leave your root section on because that'll hold everything together. What the chefs do on TV is they cut down in several places with their knife, and then holding the onion, they cut inward toward their fingers. That makes me very nervous. What I do is I quarter the onion and then cut down through it to the cutting board to put my slices in, turn it 90 degrees, do a second set of cuts. Then I cut across like the chefs do to get my dice. You can cut this last section up. That way I get a safer cut without cutting my fingers. I've never cut myself this way when I'm dicing an onion, but I and more than one others have cut themselves doing it the other way, the way the TV chefs do. So there's my diced onion, at least half of it. I have to do my other half there. And that dices all my onions, and you can see that goes pretty quickly. I'm going to bring my heat on under my saute pan here, and then put a couple of tablespoons maybe of olive oil. This is pure olive oil, not extra virgin olive oil. It has a higher smoke point, not that I'm planning to bring this up to 425 degrees. And as soon as this gets warm, I'm going to add my onions to this pan and start sauteing my onions. My oil is warm here. So I'm going to put my onions in. So what I'm doing here that's different is rather than cooking the onions until they're tender, which takes about 5 minutes, I'm going to be caramelizing my onions, which takes 20 to 25 minutes. By caramelizing the onions, I'm going to be concentrating the sugars in them, and that's going to give my meatloaf more complex flavor. As the moisture gets cooked out of it, I'm going to start reducing my temperature lower and lower. Right now I'm cooking on high. I'll probably finish up at low as I'm finishing my onions here. I want them to be a nice golden color. That's caramelized onions. Next, I want to dice up 2 stalks of celery, wash them well, trim them. I've also heard these called ribs of celery. I call them stalks of celery. So I'm going to dice these up next. I'm going to go down once, right down the middle, and then cut each of these sides into 2 or 3 pieces. I'll leave that one too. You don't have to be too precise with this because this is not like going to go into a salad where everyone's going to see it very nicely. It's going to go inside of the meatloaf. All right, that's good enough. Gonna cut that in half and then just cut across like so to give me my dice. Next, I need about 3 tablespoons of chopped fresh parsley. This is Italian parsley, otherwise known as flat leaf parsley. This usually has the most flavor. You often see in the store the curly leaf parsley. Typically that's used for garnish to make a plate look pretty, where you have some sprigs of parsley on the side of the plate. These are not pretty parsley, but they have nice flavor. So I'm going to chop up some leaves here. The leaves only, not the stalks. I have to pluck all the leaves off, enough to give me what I think will be 3 tablespoons of chopped parsley. I'm estimating that I need the leaves from about a dozen sprigs of parsley. So I pulled the leaves off of 15 sprigs just to make sure I would have enough. This looks like more than 3 tablespoons, right? But once this gets chopped down pretty fine, it's going to be reduced in size and bulk. And I don't mind chopping a little extra parsley because what I can do is put some in a bowl and use it for garnish afterwards when I plate, if I decide to do so. So I'm going to reduce this down pretty fine. You don't have to chop it too fine if you don't want to. It depends on how big you like to see the flecks of green in your food. Next, I need to dice up some green onions, 2 to 3 depending upon size. These are a little large, but I think I'll be okay with 3, so I'm going to dice these up next. Make sure they're clean, of course, and then remove any bad areas. Got to clean that off, and then trim off the root area. And then when they're this large, I like to go down once through this thicker white part so that I get a smaller dice. The green area, this leaf section, I don't care because those are hollow and they're going to dice up pretty small anyways. And then just cut across to end up with a fairly fine dice. This is where a lot of the work of cooking is done, in the preparation of all the vegetables, all the ingredients you're going to use in your recipe. Once you get down to this area, you can go more quickly. I'm going to discard those, the end pieces. So those are my diced onions. That's a lot of diced onion. I'm probably not going to use all of that. In this recipe, I'm also going to be using some fresh thyme, the leaves from some fresh thyme. Oh, it smells so good. You want to pluck all the leaves off. One of the nice things about stores today is you can find fresh herbs in a lot of the stores today. I picked this up this morning at the grocery store. So I need to pluck those leaves off and then chop up the leaves for my recipe. What I'm going to do here is take my sprigs of thyme, Get some nice long ones. You just kind of grab it at the far end. You can pluck those off, but just kind of pull backwards against the twig, and those leaves will just come right off. What I'm going to need here is about 1 tablespoon of chopped thyme. So try to pull off enough leaves so that when it's chopped, you'll have about a tablespoon of the chopped herb. So that's quite a few thyme leaves there. And then there's some of the little end sprigs, the very end of the branches, that are very tender. So you can just chop those up. You don't want to get those woody middle branches in there, but the tender part. All right, now what I'm going to do is, let me get a spoon out. I'm going to separate some of this. I'm going to take a little bit of my thyme, a little bit of my parsley, a little bit of my green onion, and put that in a separate bowl. I'm going to put this in my reduction sauce. Meanwhile, I'm going to put my herbs, the remainder of these herbs, in a bowl, because those are going to go inside the meatloaf. Okay, so I've divided my herbs now between those that will go into the reduction sauce and those that will go into the meatloaf. I want you to see my caramelized onions here. These look so good. Notice any difference? See how dark those are? I'm going to turn my heat off under these. Now I have to move these to a bowl to let these cool, and then I'm going to saute my celery just until it's tender. I added just a few more drops of oil to the pan. I'm going to turn my heat back up again and then put my celery in there. This only needs to be sauteed until it's tender. That's going to take about 5, 6, 7 minutes. So let's talk about the meat. Now, if you can find veal, ground veal, buy it. It's almost impossible to find ground veal in this town. So what I'm using here is half ground beef and half ground pork. This is 1.5 pounds or 680 grams of each. If you can find veal, then use 1 pound each, which is about 450 grams. Next, I have to measure out some milk, which gives me an excuse to use my glass milk bottle. I bought this on clearance in what my friend calls the bougie cooking store, as in bourgeois. You look around for things like this. If you can get them on clearance, all the better. I need about 2/3 of a cup of milk here, which is 158 milliliters. Thankfully, this little vessel has good markings on it. So there's my milk. I'm just about ready now to start assembling my meatloaf. All right, I'm going to start assembling my meatloaf here. I put a rubber glove on, because that's how I'm going to mix this all together. So again, I have my 2 different kinds of meat. This is 1.5 pounds or 680 grams each of ground pork and ground beef. This is my herbs that I saved for this. The smaller herbs are going to go into the reduction sauce. So this is the green onions, the thyme, and the flat leaf parsley. I need to put my garlic in there. I'm going to use a garlic press here. I think everyone pretty much has a garlic press. This is the easiest way to mince garlic. If you don't have one, you just want to chop up the garlic really fine. So I'm just going to crush this in. Garlic press makes this so easy. Oops, got some big chunks there. And then finally 3. All right, my garlic is in there. What's next? 3 eggs. Those are large eggs. This is 1 1/3 cups, which is about 4 ounces, 113 grams of panko breadcrumbs. The difference between panko and regular breadcrumbs is that panko uses the white part of the bread, the crumb, whereas the ordinary breadcrumbs you see in the grocery store, those include the crust of the bread. Is one better than the other? No, not really. This is my cooled onions and my celery that have been cooked. I want to put in about 2 teaspoons of salt. That seems like a lot, but I'm going to try this. Maybe I'll go light, a little bit light on the salt. Put my milk in there. And then finally, I'm going to get a bit of paper towel here because I'm going to grind some black pepper in there. So I'm going to use this on the handle so I don't get the handle of my pepper grinder dirty. And I shouldn't say finally, because what I need to do is, this is another addition that I've made to my recipe. I just think when cooking with beef, the best thing you can do is add some nutmeg. So as far as the black pepper, maybe half a teaspoon, quarter teaspoon to a half a teaspoon, and about a quarter teaspoon to a half a teaspoon of nutmeg. And then just start mixing this all up. This is why I put a rubber glove on, because it's just so much easier to mix things up with your hands. This is a wet mixture, but those panko breadcrumbs will absorb this moisture. See, this is starting to stiffen up. I can feel it. That's because those breadcrumbs now are absorbing the moisture from that milk. And that's what I want. I want it to be able to hold a shape when I shape this onto my baking pan. And I'm going to show you that in a moment. Now, normally I would just do this inside of a baking pan. That's what the recipe calls for. But I'm wondering about those baking pans that have those inserts for meatloaf that holds the meatloaf a little up off the bottom to allow grease to drip out and not get into the meatloaf. So I'm thinking maybe I can make my own rack to do this. So let me show you what I'm going to do. Ever seen one of these? It has these different elevations so that you can control the rack. Maybe you've got one. If you're good at building puzzles, these come apart easily enough. I always pull it apart to clean it anyways. I'm going to pull these top pieces out. All right. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to reassemble it with just one piece to make a flat rack to keep my meatloaf from kind of sinking down between these bars. I cut a piece of aluminum foil and folded it up. Going to place that in the middle. Do this and then fold up that aluminum foil and crease it. Now I got a flat rack, and so that the grease can get out, I'm going to use my digital thermometer because it's got a really nice point. I'm just going to poke a bunch of holes in there. So my grease can escape. And then set this inside of my baking pan. And that's my pan and rack for my meatloaf. Now I have to shape my meatloaf and get it in there. Next, I need to shape my meat into my meatloaf. I put down a piece of parchment paper, which will make it pretty easy to do this, and then I'll just transfer that to my baking dish. So let me get my meat out here. I'm thinking what might be the most fun here. I'm gonna just separate that a little bit from the side of the bowl. Then I'm just gonna turn the bowl upside down and shake the meat out. Nice. All right. And then you want to just shape this into a meatloaf that's going to fit that pan. So there's my roasting pan. Set that on my foil. And that is ready to go into the oven. In the meantime, almost there, I've been heating my oven up to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. That's about 175, 177 degrees Celsius. I'm going to bake my meatloaf for 40 to 45, 50 minutes. I'm looking for an internal temperature. I'll use a digital thermometer. A temperature of about 150 to 155 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 66 to 68 degrees Celsius. One of the ingredients called for in this recipe, and this is actually going to go into the reduction sauce, is roasted garlic. So I'm going to roast my garlic in the oven with the meatloaf, but first I want to wrap it in parchment paper first. Let me show you how I'm going to do that. Now I have roasted garlic this way before. I think it's a neat trick. I have just a narrow piece of parchment paper here. I'm going to put my, what is that, 7, I have 7 cloves of garlic there, 6 to 8 depending upon size. And I'm going to wrap that up in my parchment paper and then fold up these 2 sides and then roll it down to form a packet, and with a stapler staple it. So there it is, cute little packet of garlic. I'm going to roast this for about 30 minutes. The meatloaf has to roast for about 45 to 50 minutes. So I'm going to set my timer for 30 minutes, pull this out, and then continue roasting my meatloaf until it's done. In about 5 minutes, I'm going to take my garlic out of the oven, but I looked at my roast. That's going to need a lot more than 35 to 40 minutes. I'm going to estimate at this point 70 to 80 minutes. It still looks pretty raw in there. So in the meantime, I'm going to start working on my reduction sauce. And here again is where I'm going to do something different, departing from the original. The original recipe did not call for using bourbon in the reduction sauce. But I think the woodiness of the bourbon is going to be a really nice addition to my reduction sauce. So I'm going to use bourbon in my reduction sauce. I'm going to bring my heat up under my skillet here, my saute pan. This is 2 cups of homemade chicken stock. This has to melt. It's frozen from my freezer. Once that's melted, I'll start adding my other ingredients to this. My stock is just now coming up to the simmer. So I'm going to put my garlic in there, which I mashed. That's my roasted garlic. And I'm going to put my butter in there. I'm adding 3 tablespoons of butter here to my skillet. That should be good enough. I'm going to bring my heat up to high here. Get this to a rolling boil, and then I'm going to add a splash of, like I said, 1/4 to maybe 1/3 of a cup of bourbon. Bring this to a boil, and then I'm going to simmer this to reduce this down to about half or even 1/3 of its original volume. I want this just slightly thickened. I turn the heat off under my reduction sauce because it's right about where I want it. I checked the internal temperature on the meatloaf after it had been in the oven for 50 minutes. It was only up to 92 degrees Fahrenheit. It's got quite a ways to go. So I raised the oven temperature to 375 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 190 degrees Celsius. And I'm going to estimate that this has to bake for at least 60 to 70 minutes for it to reach the internal temperature when it's done. I have in the meantime removed my reduction sauce. I transferred it to a little pan so it would be easier to reheat when my meat is done. And to finish this, I want to stir in those herbs that I set aside. The thyme, the green onion, and the parsley. That doesn't need to cook, just let it sit. And when the meat is done, I'll bring that back up to temperature and we'll use that to garnish the meat. Okay, so where are we at? After over 80 minutes, this came up to 140 degrees. Now I'm going to tent this. Like so. And I'm going to let this sit for about 10 minutes. That should bring the temperature up to about 150 degrees. In the meantime, I'm going to heat up some mashed potatoes and then warm up my garnish reduction sauce. And we should be ready to cut into this and serve. This has had some time to rest now. I'm going to carve off a big thick piece toward one end here. Feels nice and firm inside. Cooked all the way through, looks beautiful. I'm going to put that slice on a plate. And then my reduction sauce. Sprinkle some over the top. Put some over the potatoes. And let a little pool down on the bottom of the dish. The aroma of this has already got me captivated. Tender, it cuts with a fork. Get some of my sauce on there. The meatloaf is good, but the sauce is phenomenal. I want to taste it with my mashed potatoes. This gives my Tuscan meatloaf a real run for its money. This is so good, especially that reduction sauce. Okay, excuse me, I gotta go enjoy my dinner. And I am really going to enjoy this. For a printable PDF copy of this recipe with step-by-step photographs, visit the White Trash Cooking website and look on the home page or in the recipe archive.